So let's turn now to our panel to discuss this further. Chemi Lhamo is a Canadian Tibetan activist, and Bruce Kidd is a former Olympian and professor of kinesiology and physical education at the University of Toronto. They're both joining us from Toronto. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Happy to be here.
Chemi, let's begin with you, because I know that you participated in a demonstration today in Toronto protesting the Games. You don't want the Games to happen. You don't want people celebrating the Games. Give us the synopsis of your argument.
Beijing 22, these games are set to happen amidst one of the world's worst crackdowns against freedom, democracy, and human rights. Today's demonstration was actually a part of Global Week of Action that's actually happening over 20 cities across the world. People have gathered, not just the Tibetans, but Uyghurs, Hong Kongers, our allies have come together calling for boycott Beijing 2022. And today, marking the beginning of Olympics, we were encouraging everyone and anyone to join our I Will Not Watch campaign. You can learn more at iwillnotwatch.org on how you can make a pledge to not watch the Games and be complicit in legitimizing the genocide the Chinese government is currently committing.
Bruce, do you agree with that?
Well, I admire Chemi's courage and her advocacy, and she and her group have pushed us to think through these issues for the whole world of sport and the Olympics. But she misses the point of the Olympics. Ever since their origins in the late 19th century, the Olympics have sought to bring people together, recognizing, because of the tremendous differences in ideology, political systems, and so on, to bring people together under peaceful auspices to develop respect and develop a social movement to argue against war and military adventures. And that's who we are. And we're going ahead with that, even though there are these huge contradictions and other issues that we have to face up to. We may have to rethink this going ahead, but right now we're about bringing the world together. And at a time of growing xenophobia, a time of growing barriers and so on, we think that overall that's the best thing to do.
So Bruce, I completely agree. However, in terms of being a force for good, when South Africa was included in the Olympics and, it became a force to end apartheid in many ways, I would agree. I would agree that it's a force for good when, countries are able to celebrate Olympics to bring people together. But when the Chinese government, any authoritarian regime is known in history to use the Olympics, which is, a grand sort of prestigious event to legitimize, to find external and both domestic legitimation for all of their crimes against humanity, then, if the international world stays quiet when this is happening, then when do we stand up for what is right?
Well, I think there are there are athletes and sports people who are making those points, but these are the Games for the entire world, and Beijing is the site for a world project and a world coming together. I don't think a single Canadian athlete in Beijing right now thinks that they're lending support to the Chinese regime. They are there to gather with like-minded people, their athletes and friends from other countries, to make an Olympics in the spirit of sport and in the spirit of international respect. It's full of contradictions, which you point out. But we're not able to solve all the problems in the world. The anti-apartheid campaign in sport, which I led in Canada for more than 20 years, about what was happening in sport. And the sports community does take responsibility for human rights abuses in sport. But there's a limit to what we can do. If Canada completely shut off with China, I know Canadian athletes would join with that. But while everybody else is increasing their trade with China, when Tim Hortons, which market itself with a Maple Leaf, is doubling the number of franchises in China, and nobody else is doing anything, we feel that that's an unfair expectation, and we want to go ahead with our bridge building that is so much a part of our tradition.
Okay, so Bruce, allow me to jump in on that. Chemi, I know you want to get in there, but let me pose this argument, Bruce, that many have brought up. So it was only 14 years ago that Beijing hosted the Summer Games. And at that time, it was another huge spectacle, and those same issues came up about human rights abuses. In fact, many would argue things have only gotten worse in China in terms of human rights abuses in the past 14 years. During the 2008 Games, the argument presented at that time is that, yeah, China's not perfect. Yeah, maybe the athletes shouldn't go there. Maybe we shouldn't tacitly be giving our consent to this regime. But this is a way to hold them accountable and bring them into the international fold so that things do improve for Taiwan, for Hong Kong, for women, for the working class, for Uyghurs, for all of these various groups that get squished by the regime. And 14 years later, it's worse. So did the sport, did the Olympics make any sort of difference in this case?
Well, that's a conversation for longer a longer discussion, and I have weighed in on that. Let me point this out, though. The Olympics have never been awarded on the grounds of human rights. I think Chemi's campaign and other advocates are forcing us to consider that. But our project has always been about something very different. Recognizing that there are very different regimes in the world, we want to at least bring together. If there was going to be a human rights standard for the awarding of major sports events, where would we go? Who would come to Canada? Who would travel to the United States? Where are the countries that are without stain in this regard? Chemi is raising those questions for us, but we're not able to deal that. And in a world where there's ongoing trade, ongoing employment, ongoing universities exchanges with China, we're simply not capable. We're simply not capable of addressing all that. And we think, although COVID makes it very, very hard, and all of these restrictions and surveillance because of COVID make it very, very difficult for us to engage in the kind of dialogue we want, we think that even with a country like China, it's possible to have peaceful, constructive dialogue. Okay. That's where we are, and that is our tradition.
Okay.
And people
let me bring Chemi into the conversation, because I do want to push back on Chemi a little bit as well, because Bruce does bring up a point that we hear often, which is, look, these are not professional athletes who dedicate so much of their lives, their entire lives, to achieving this level of success. It's a dream for so many of them. Many of them are quite young. And is it too much of an onus of responsibility to place upon athletes who may or may not be political in their interests at all to say, don't go to these games, don't support this government, don't support this city because of a political issue between Beijing and Ottawa? How do you respond to that?
Well, first and foremost, regarding what Bruce is saying, just because we have a stain in our human rights record here in Canada does not mean we do not have the right to speak against what's happening there. We have every right as a human, as a global citizen. It is our very responsibility and duty to ensure that the problems not only at home but also overseas are being addressed. That's what I wanted to point out first and foremost. And then additionally, in regards to the athletes, we understand, and that's why Natasha, last time I was here, I was speaking about the Athletes Wanted campaign. Folks can go and actually check out the website that we had created for athletes. We've been doing one-on-one outreach to athletes, their athletic associations, and talking to them and, trying to get an opportunity to have conversations with Tibetans, to Uyghurs, one-on-one, on a human-to-human level. The ask for the athletes, yes, it was about boycott games, but in the case that they do attend, we've also encouraged them not to attend opening ceremonies. We've also encouraged them to have briefings so that they can learn more about the human rights violations, even if their intentions, of course, as Bruce mentioned, maybe not even one Canadian athlete's intention is to go and legitimize the crimes of the CCP. However, the Chinese government is using the athletes as a pawn, and as Michaela has mentioned, it is the IOC. We need to be pointing fingers at IOC and holding these entities accountable for what they have done. They are the ones that have put the athletes in a position where they have to pick between human rights and a backdrop of genocide games to get their medals for something that they have worked towards all their lives.
I wish we had more time, guys, but we have to leave it there. Chemi Lhamo is a Canadian Tibetan activist, and Bruce Kidd is a former Olympian and a professor of kinesiology and physical education at the University of Toronto. Thank you both so much for your time and your insights.
Thank you.
Thank you. Pleasure.